My name is Wilma McDowell. My birthday is May 11th, 1941. My parents were W.L. and Rosie Patterson. I only have one sibling, it's Wayne Patterson. My dad was a farmer. My mother was a seamstress. When I was little, we had a milk cow and chickens, and we had some hogs. As I grew older, later he had a dairy. Everybody had tobacco, of course, and I did strip tobacco some. I started in a one-room school. The name of it was Morrison. I went to Morrison. Mary Edith Davenport, later Peace, was my teacher, and I'm not sure if that was the only year she taught or not. And at the time when I first started, it was probably, I don't know, 2 miles. I can't tell you exactly. But a lot of days I rode to school with her. And her boyfriend took her to school, and I rode with them. And sometimes we walked. I did walk a little bit. The grades that we had were 1 through 8. We only had one teacher. We had a wood stove, and we also had, it might have been a coal stove, I cannot remember that part. But we had no bathroom. We had a water bucket. The boys would go down the road and get some water and bring it back. And I only went there from like whenever we started in the summer, which I think was July, until March. Now it was I thought a strange calendar. That was my first grade, and they said, well, if you go to Hodgenville till their school is out, you can go to the 3rd grade next year. So that's what I did. I had a little bit of 2nd grade and then the 3rd grade. Then I rode the bus to school. It was very different. We had lunch provided there. It was 20 cents, our lunch was. The cafeteria was on the 1st floor, of course. High school was upstairs, and the 3rd grade I was in had about 70 people at least. When we were in high school, a lot of bad roads, of course, because all of them weren't blacktop. And in 1958, in February, I think it was, this bus went off an embankment in Floyd County. Because of that, we had a lot of missed school, I think, and we had to make up some school on Saturdays. And one Saturday, 2 girls in our class, in the 58 class, ran away and got married. There were several people that married classmates. I can think of 2 or 3 particular classes that there were several people that got married and were still, married all their lives. I graduated from Hodgenville in 1958, and we were the last class. I met Gordon McDowell at a 4-H meeting. I was 15, and he was 16. Ironically enough, Gordon went to the same one-room school that I did, but he only went there 1 year. He moved to Buffalo, and so I didn't know him at that time. Gordon was involved in showing dairy cattle, and I was involved in sewing and cooking projects. A mutual friend of ours, or his and mine, were dating, and we went on a double date with them. And then after that, we mostly double dated with our friends. Some of our friends didn't have a car sometimes, and Gordon did, or had access to a car. Not always. I mean, there was one particular couple that it didn't matter where he went as long as Gordon went along too. We dated about a year before we decided to get married. I graduated in May and got married in June. We got married at South Fork Church on June the 11th, 1958. And the reason we got married on the Wednesday was the preacher was a seminary student, and he was down for the Bible school week, and we got married during Bible school. When we first got married, we lived in Hodgenville on Kirkpatrick Avenue, 547. And it was just down the street from Gordon's cousin. there was a house between us, and we lived there for 6 months. Then the rent was $55 a month. We bought a TV that was $39. We also bought our furniture. We had a living room couch and chair and end tables that we bought at C&C Hardware, and I think that was maybe $80. We also bought a gray Formica dinette set, and it was $80. And then we found a place to rent in Buffalo, next door to Otis and Maxine Keith. And we lived there about 2.5 years. Well, then an opportunity came to buy this small farm just down the road on L&N Turnpike, and we moved there, and we lived there for about 5 years, I think, 5 or 6. Then we moved back to B.F. Brown Road in a house that belonged to some of Gordon's ancestors. We purchased the house, the farm, from B.F. Brown. At that time, B.F. was running for sheriff, I think, and he moved to Hodgenville, and we bought the farm. That was like 120 acres, and it joined his dad's farm. Gordon grew up right here on B.F. Brown Road, and really, with the exception of living in Hodgenville for a little while and living in Buffalo for just a short while, we have always lived in this area, except when he became pastor of the church, and we moved to a church parsonage, and we were there for 8 years, I think. When we first got married, Gordon's job was working as an artificial inseminator for Kentucky Artificial Breeding Association. He did artificial insemination for dairy cattle. We had a 1958 Ford, and some days he had maybe as many as 20 farm visits. In 13 months, the car had 65,000 miles on it. He had 5 breeds. He had Brown Swiss, Ayrshire, Guernsey, Jersey, and Holsteins. And he worked for almost 10 years doing this. Ray Graham took him to Lexington a week to University of Kentucky to learn how to do this artificial insemination, because he told Gordon, he said, I know this is something you're interested in. He was really making a sacrifice. He got up and milked his cows. Ray did. Ray had cows on the farm. He was the ag teacher at Buffalo. He got up and milked his cows, took Gordon to Lexington. They drove back home. Same thing all over again the next day for a week. That's where Gordon learned the trade. After we moved down here, and even before, his dad built a milk parlor, and I think he built it, he'd never had a milk parlor. He'd had a concrete in the driveway. That's what he milked on and sold grade C milk. Then after he built this milk parlor, they sold grade A milk. And Gordon and his dad milked together. In fact, when he was in school, he had, after a certain amount of time, when he was a teenager, his dad told him, you milk these certain 2 cows or something, and you get the milk from that, and that was his spending money. When Gordon was in high school, they milked by hand for a while. Then when he went to the state fair one time and stayed at the state fair the first time, and it was about 1953, I think, his dad said after that he bought a milking machine because they'd been milking by hand before that. And then later, in the early 60s, they built a milk parlor. He was dealing with registered Guernseys, and we sold sometimes to Earlers, and they gave us a little premium, maybe a 25 cent on 100 premium, because Guernseys had a better butterfat content. And each year when we were selling to Earlers, from the Earlers stores in Louisville, they would bring us maybe some custard and maybe some of their Earlers candy. And you know, that was just a neat thing to be a part of the Earlers. I think the most they ever milked was about 60. That's small numbers in comparison to a lot of people. But they did it all themselves. We didn't have family vacations. Their vacation was to go to the state fair and show their cattle, and Gordon and I went on our first vacation after we'd been married 20 years. Pam was born in 1959, Patty was born in 1960, Penny was born in 1963, and Paula was born in 1967. All girls, and all their names began with a P. Their middle initials all began with a D. It's very confusing to a lot of people. I'm not sorry I named them that. And off the record, I told them if we had one more, it would be Phyllis Diller probably. Pam was born when we lived next door to Otis and Maxine Keith. In fact, Pam and Patty were both born when we lived there. Penny was born, I guess our address was just Buffalo, Star Route Buffalo at that time. And Paula was born then on B.F. Brown Road. I think he always wanted a boy, but I think afterwards, and after they started growing up, he decided he liked his girls. And they were all kind of daddy's girls. It seems ironic that Gordon and I met in 4-H, and then our children were heavily involved in 4-H, showing cattle at the fairs. They canned, that was some of the things they did, baked. When they were in 4-H, they showed cattle at as many as 6 or 7 county fairs during the summer. Then they would spend a week at the state fair showing their cattle. They look for a, quote, kind of a perfect animal, and you have a scorecard. In fact, Gordon's mother was pretty good. They would have judging contests for seniors at a lot of the places, and a long time ago, she would win some prizes picking out the best animal. Sometimes they want them a little sharper through their throat. Beef cattle are thick all over. You want your dairy cattle to be a little more lean. You want it to be standing on a straight set of legs, straight top line. And our children participated in a lot of judging contests. They learned very quickly that they don't always stand on top, and you learn to be a gracious loser. He was saved when he was about 9. And when he was young, he got a plaque one time for inviting the most people to Bible school. Then when we got married, we started attending South Fork. That's where Gordon attended. I was still almost in Bible school age, I felt like, and I was helping in Bible school. And I can remember helping, they called it the junior class then. They were about 9 and 10-year-olds in Bible school. And I had 2 babies, and I took my babies to Bible school and helped with the Bible school. And at that time, Gordon was a Sunday school teacher sometimes. In fact, Gordon became the Sunday school teacher for the older men. At that time, Gordon was maybe in his 20s or early 30s, and he was teaching the 65 and 75-year-olds. The first time he ever spoke was Baptist Men's Day, and it was about 1980. He just was afraid he couldn't, just not have anything to say. Well, he had this little notebook, one of those little bitty notebooks about a 3x5, and he wrote his sermon notes on that. And he went on and on. And I thought, I think I'm going to have to tell him it's time to stop. But that was his first experience of speaking as a lay speaker. And then in 1983, he went and spoke at Oak Hill, I know, and he spoke at Etna Grove as just a lay speaker. He did a lot of ministry in the milk parlor. I guess people think that's crazy, but people came by and asked for advice sometimes, and, he cried with them, he laughed with them, whatever. And he just said, Lord, just don't make me be a pastor, I just don't want to do that. I just don't, I just like to go speak for them and share the word and not have the responsibility of being their pastor, I guess. But we went to this church, and they had lost their pastor. They came on Christmas and asked him to come on Christmas morning, or the nearest Sunday to Christmas. And we had been practicing with the choir at South Fork, and we were looking forward to that. And they told him, they said, well, if you don't come, we're just not going to have anybody. And so we went. And then we filled in until about, I guess it was April. And then that's when they called him to be their pastor. He became an ordained minister, and he went to Three Forks of Bacon Creek as their pastor. Paula went into the Navy, and I had a new job. So we all had a lot of things to get used to. But our 16 years at Three Forks Bacon Creek was very good. I laughed and told him, though, when I went there the first Sunday, I was in the Sunday school class, and this was just the women's Sunday school class, and there were people my age, and there were people my mother's age, and I laughed and said, well, once you get in that class, you never get out, because you just have to die to get out of that class. In 2005, I think, Lonnie Sheets had been director of missions, and he was going to retire from his position. And Gordon was about the same age as Lonnie, but Lonnie, for some reason, was going to retire. And so they started a search committee to get a new director of missions. And they got a few people that applied, and one day they told Gordon, they said, why don't you send a resume? And he said, well, I don't have a resume. So we finally patched him up a resume and gave it to him, and he was elected to be their director of missions. And so he served in that position for 11 years. And then his health became where he wasn't just able to do what he thought he needed to do. South Fork is very involved in missions, and that's where I go now. I told them that's where we started, that's where I guess we would end. I like to sew. Now I belong to a quilting group. In fact, I belong to two groups. One, we make quilts for shelters, and then we do other projects, like we make the little dresses for other countries that we send on mission. I've delved through Ancestry some, and I guess you just always wonder about your family. And one time I asked one of my aunts, I said, well, what was Grandma Patterson's name? She said, and she had gotten older, and she said, oh, I just can't remember. And you know, that kind of triggered me to just want to learn all these things. I guess I've always been curious. Nosy is probably a better word, but curious is, I guess, the way. And somebody asked me one time something about something, and I said, well, the only way you learn answers is to ask questions, or sometimes it's sit and listen. And I said, you can learn a lot more listening than you can talking. I'd like to be remembered as a person who helps others, who doesn't have to have recognition for what I've done. I saw this quote once that says, we don't all have to be in the parade. Some have to sit by the sidelines and clap.